that right? Sure, I can go next. Is that right though? I don't know. That is not right. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll try and cover some ground quickly here and make up time. Key findings from OSU's first couple of years of big leaf maple research. We have a lot of people on our team, some people with maple sugaring experience, others that we're trying to bring into the fold and build greater capacity across different disciplines. And a couple of my students are here, a number of team members, some landowner partners like Will McClatchy, great scientist, and now a retired professor and apple grower, and has loaned us his site as one of our key places. Go ahead and flip to the next one. So I just wanted to briefly mention, I'm glad that Greg did the landowner acknowledgement, and there's not a lot of information about Native American Indian use of big leaf maple, but this is an old graphic representing a timeline of Native American, well, I guess I can't work the floor here. Very awkward for a professor. But anyway, just, I mean, 14,000 plus years, time memorial, wherever you want to draw the line. But there's no doubt in my mind that Native Americans knew how to use big leaf maple sap for foods, probably for use in sealing boats, all kinds of things. So hopefully at some point we'll get those stories. I just wanted to point out this, it was mentioned earlier, but this early Ruth study, you know, when they did this, and unfortunately they're not around to talk to, but there were already hobbyists that had been tapping. I knew a couple as a kid in Salem, a couple older women that tapped, and you know, I was too young to really realize the significance of that and wish I'd talked to them. But keep an eye out for those oral history stories of people that talk about, you know, it's like, oh, I did that back in the 50s, or our great grandfather did, because those could be valuable for us. Yeah, go ahead and go to the next one. So we submitted our proposal as COVID was starting to spread. So you can insert your own expletive there. It was bad for a project with extensive public involvement. We knew the Washington team and Washington State team were doing a more sort of controlled study on their research for us. And so we wanted to do something a little bit different and try and be a little bit more maybe landowner based, get out there in a lot of different kinds of terrains and just experience what the problems were. And then to think about those problems, try and see what we could learn from the sugar maple industry out east and what we couldn't learn. And that would help us define better what the key things to focus on for how to do sugaring here in the Pacific Northwest. So, you know, it was difficult because we had a lot of restrictions and couldn't get out and do the things the way we wanted to do them. So basically, Taylor Larson and myself just hit the ground running and went out and just started putting taps in with some willing landowners, and that was our first winter. And this next winter, things are starting to loosen up, and we were able to do a little bit more participatory kinds of things. But all that said, we've learned a lot. Next slide, please. Oh, and I should have mentioned also that happened that summer. We had several great sites identified on the Cascade Slope in the Willamette Basin, Willamette River Basin, And we had catastrophic wildfires like we had never seen in my lifetime come with eastern winds blowing them down all the way, lapping at the edges of cities like Eugene and Sweet Home and Estacada, and tons of great big leaf sites got damaged, or there was so much work that had to be done to, you know, start to rebuild people's homes and repair areas that it's not, we don't have any sites on that slope. But later on, I'll get to a map and show you that we have some new ones planned there. So our big questions is, well, how does big leaf differ from sugar mapling, of course? And is it ecologically, economically, and culturally viable? So it's not just a question of economics, but there's can it have a positive ecological impact? What are the opportunities there? And culturally, is this something that, in the Northeast, sugaring is like, I mean, people are passionate about it, like they love it. It's in their blood. And uh, would it be different here? And no reason to expect it wouldn't be the same kind of passion. And certainly in this room, it's indicative of how excited people can get. But I think it's going to take this sort of broad, all walks of life, engagement and excitement about it and learning about it. So the kinds of things that, like Eliza Nelson, please talk with her. It's really right over here doing the Oregon Maple Project, which is sort of this community-based sugaring and education approach, and really getting a lot of people excited by, allowing them to dip their toe in sugaring. So we had a number, I won't go into great detail about our objectives of our research, but we wanted to create awareness that that you can have delicious syrup and other sap-based foods from big leaf maple, get people excited about, like, oh, those trees are really cool, because they've been maligned for a long time, at least in forestry, sort of, treated as the tree to get rid of. Wanted to form good partnerships with landowners, ones that we hopefully will last, well into the future, decades, hopefully, thinking long term. Wanted to really build a peer learning network, really big believer in local knowledge, and get people started on something and see how they innovate, see how they solve the problems, and learn from that. And we have a lot of different kinds of ways and tools that we like to capture those things, including like we're trying to pioneer some new sort of qualitative mapping techniques, things that can help communities capture their history and heritage and knowledge going forward, rather than trying to remember what was in the past. We had an idea that I'm going to talk a little bit about theory in a second, but we had an idea of developing a mobile service model. Could you have something akin to like a landscaping company that went around and serviced different landowners? Because not every landowner has the time or the willingness to contribute that labor. And we knew that from other products we'd worked on. So we thought, well, maybe let's see what we can do. How far can we go? How many kind of little nodes could we develop? And so that's a work in progress right now. I don't have a lot of conclusive things to say about it, but I have a lot of observations I could go into more detail. If anybody ever wanted to just talk on the phone or come visit us in Oregon, we'd welcome that. We wanted to start to get at nutrients, flavor, and bacteria. We didn't really, I mean, you could do a whole $1 million grant, National Science Foundation grant to just get at like bacteria. And a lot of that's been done on the East Coast, but there definitely are some differences with our seasonal fluctuations. We're learning that the nutrient load is quite extensive for sugar or for big leaf maple, and Mike Farrell's, we've been exchanging some emails, and he's talked a little bit about how there are sugar maple tappers that also have high nutrient loads, lots of minerals in their soils. So, but I haven't read anything published about that. I'd really like to see that data because I want to know if it's like an outlier for them, the exception. But I think with us, it's more the norm than the exception. And so Greg talked about the difficulties of trying to filter that and deal with those, huge amounts of sugar sands. And I'm talking huge, like tons in the evaporator, clogged filter presses, and getting it into a bottle and still seeing stuff precipitate down, and it's like, oh my God, it's never ending. So, and then we wanted to get into a little test marketing of different products. So we have a partner, Owen Rice, with a natural products firm that has, he's ships products, specialty products throughout the U.S., the lower 48. And so, in addition to syrup, we're hoping to be able to, just send out some samples of different things like maple water. He, on his own dime, put in big leaf flowers and got a lot of excellent feedback from chefs. They're super excited in places like New York to have another cool, interesting wild product. And different than the sugar maple, our flowers, I mean, one tree, you can never harvest everything off a big tree. One, you can't get to it, but it's just like so much. And when you're talking millions of trees across the landscape, and it was interesting because like the flowering's done in Oregon, maybe except for some really higher places, but I was thinking, the window there just being a couple weeks for a harvester, well, they could work their way up the latitudes and maybe have a couple months of harvesting if they could have places to do it. Next slide. So I wanted to just briefly touch on sort of a theoretical framework here that I think might be helpful for us. So lots and lots of different trees are tapped or scarred for different syrups and saps and resins and things, like long old traditions all over the world, including maple in Scandinavian countries. Japan, Korea was mentioned. And, there's a lot to learn there. I have brought a few props here. Oh, here's that moose study that's worth looking at. You might pass it around if you haven't seen it, from 1972. But this is a FAO publication on turpentine and rosin. Naval stores all come from pine trees. But at one time, the turpentine, hand-gathered turpentine industry in the Southeast was bigger than timber, especially during World War I, when there was a massive demand for ships, uh, using the naval stores, the gummy tars and stuff in sealing ships. So there's thousands of species here in the United States that are commercially marketed as non-timber forest products, mushrooms, medicinal plants, all these sort of a huge umbrella that we sort of define them as non-timber as a way of getting them out of the shadow of industrial timber products, to draw attention to those. And in Oregon alone, there's over 400 species that are commercially harvested, probably more, but those are the ones we know about. I've got a database with all the species and common names and different uses. The key thing here is all those are harvested manually. And so that's something for us to really pay attention to. Now with big leaf maple tapping to collect sap to make products like maple water or syrup or something, there's a bit of automation in it. There's maybe vacuum tubing, uh, vacuum pump. There's some machines like reverse osmosis to remove the water. But still, there's a tremendous amount of manual labor that has to go into the equation. And so um, when we're talking about scaling up, that's something to really consider because across all these different non-timber forest products, people could be out there managing their forest for biodiversity. There's markets for Oregon grape and Pipsissewa and all these things, and yet very few people make a living doing that. There's lots of harvesters that make a little bit of cash and pocket change, and some exceptionally dedicated ones, like Justin Anderson, can make $75,000 a year harvesting Oregon white and black truffles from the wild. But those are the exceptions. And that manual labor thing, question or piece of the equation has been a real barrier. So I'm interested to see how maybe Big Leaf might be a little different, somewhere in the sweet spot between total manual labor and automated industrial forestry. And maybe if you're getting into managing for Big Leaf, it'll drag some other things along. Maybe you'll be like, oh, I could start specializing in collecting those trillium seeds, which are extremely valuable and extremely hard to collect, but they're all around you when you're tapping Big Leaf maple. Next slide, please. Is there water? Oh, thanks. So just wanted to talk about, just show this slide. Here's a typical slash pile on a Douglas fir forest, harvested the Douglas fir, and all these other products are just left in the slash pile. And I won't get into public lands policy, but I will say harvesters are caught, oh, thank you. Harvesters are caught in this real contradiction of, they will be told, you can't get a permit to go out and harvest arnica on any scale because we don't know what the ecological consequences of that are. And yet they turn around and they see this. And so that's frustrating. And that drives a division between harvesters willing to cooperate with scientists and managers. Creates a lot of animosity. And so we need to do better on that front. And private lands are a good place to push forward on that and show public agencies how it can be done. Next slide, please. So, Big Leaf is occurring where there's a lot of rainfall, and our harvest area is sort of in those, our focus areas is the white, I don't know if you can see the white dots there, that's basically the Willamette Valley Basin. And, but the range is bigger, and what's also key in that, and I don't have a temperature layer on that, but is you got to be places where there's freezing nights and above freezing days, preferably seemingly around 38, 40 degrees. So the edges on the outer part of the Willamette Basin, the Cascade Slope, the Coast Slope, the southern slope where Will's property is, those are all, 500 to 1,500 feet in elevation, and they're really prime areas, and there's just a huge abundance of maple. I mean, just incredible amounts everywhere. And you go to like Fiona's property, and on 120 acres, I'm conservatively estimating 50,000 tappable stems. I mean, such an intense, massive concentration of maple. Like we could all just set up shop there and not have to go anywhere else. And she's got to deal, with some infrastructure things. And a lot of landowners are challenged in that way. They have some great property, but to get to the Maple, it's going to require an investment in things like probably a rock road that will hold up in the winter so you can get vehicles in there to collect collection tanks or, you know, anyway, won't go into great detail, but these are challenges and problems that we're trying to find good workarounds and then probably make some recommendations to the state of Oregon on how they can support landowners better. Next slide, please. So just a brief snapshot of our tapping area. So the base of operations being like Corvallis, and we have a farm outside of Springfield, 300-acre place. Also has maples, and we're doing some flatland tapping experiments there. But and then our sort of main area where we're sort of leading the research and the landowners are sort of not super actively involved in the setups and whatnot are down at Will's Place in the southern part of the Willamette Valley Basin, call that the Lorain area, and we've been working really closely with Tracy Johnson. Tracy, where are you? Over there. Her and her husband have a vineyard, and they've been super great people to collaborate with. Very patient because we don't have all the answers. We can't just waltz in and make perfect setups and make perfect syrup. We're learning together, and it's been really rewarding partnership with them. And I just want to say that this last winter, they had such a long run of sort of perfect weather that they did some basic math and figured out they averaged 36 gallons per tap over 32 taps. Just an extraordinary flow, and that was just on vacuum tubing, maybe like a 5-degree slope and 5/16, and just a SureFlow impeller transfer pump, like a $150 pump, just to kind of pull it along a tiny bit, but not real anything even close to high vacuum. And what would it look like with high vacuum? And go ahead and go to the next slide. Just give you a snapshot there. I want to roll through a bunch of this stuff. So we came up, you'll see the trailer out here, our mobile service unit, which we can use for public displays, public events like this, now that we are allowed to do that. And, trying to figure out what can we pack in something small, because we're trying to think, well, if we want to eventually kind of promote this idea, and there's 10, no problem. I thought I was getting a time warning. Like, okay, like 5 minutes? 10, okay. Anyway, so our whole goal is to keep costs down. We want to figure out what is the lowest possible way for people to get in and have a viable commercial business. That number is somewhere around 15,000. Originally, I was hoping for 10. It's probably about 15. Now, a mobile service unit like this, where they pulled all the equipment around and went around and did the setups and tapping and processing and everything, probably a little higher, but it's feeling doable. There's some things, we're going to have to run this by the health authorities at some point, and they're going to say, well, you're going to need a hot water sink and whatnot, but I think we can get pretty close. So I wanted to have a lot of our ducks in a row before we open that can of worms with them. Yeah. Like $15,000 to be able to really begin to do like a commercial level sort of tapping to make syrup. Yeah. But that's a cost that, we're all thinking about, well, could that be shared amongst different landowners that are close together? So it's not necessarily something somebody has to pony up just by themselves, but that's a ballpark. Um, so we, we one of the things we did right off was we realized moving sap around is a ridiculous proposition unless you concentrate it. So we started buying freezers that we could stage at different landowners. We started buying small reverse osmosis kits. So a shout out for the RO bucket people, which have made an affordable entry level kit that's really great for people to be able to see how ROs work for 350, 400 bucks, and then realize that, oh, I can actually get all those parts at my local hardware store. But it's a great entry way of learning about it. And so with the reverse osmosis in the freezers, now suddenly, we're able to put enough concentrated sap in a chest freezer, like a 16 cubic foot, that we can go and have enough sap to run through the evaporator and make syrup without running out. It's not quite as rosy as that, but basically, yeah. And we try and have some extra sap built up in reserve. So and to thaw it, it's pretty simple. You'll see out there we just have like a 15-gallon propane burner, like a turkey roaster pot or a home brew pot, and that works great. Melts very quickly. And then you're putting in warm sap into your evaporator instead of cold, so that helps speed up the process. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. I'll have all this. I wrote out these notes so that I figured I wouldn't have enough time to get through the talk, knowing how these conferences go and how chatty some of the moderators are. So you'll have this, and I'm always happy to follow up with lots of questions. But we're experimenting around with inventorying and mapping, and we started out with really comprehensive field of data, which takes a terribly long time when you're talking about 200 or 300 trees. But it is doable if you were your own landowner doing this and you really wanted to figure out where your trees were and think about planning over a long period of time. We have the apps and tools and free versions that we can provide you now. I'll make all those available on our website pretty soon. We kept scaling down though, like how much could we do as a research team, or if you're providing a service, go out and do things. And in the end of the day, we were just like, let's take a picture and hit a tree with a waypoint. But I wanted to bring up this slide. This is not from Fiona's, but it's very similar to Fiona's, where you have these giant clumps, with 20, 30 tappable stems in them. And if you look at FIA data, forest inventory and analysis data, it's worthless, basically, because you don't have any, they're counting that as one tree, but in that picture, you probably have 150 stems in there, and that's just not captured in FIA data. So there's a lot of room for improvement in thinking about how we might actually count tappable stems on the landscape. Next slide. So we've been working with using a drone to see if that's helpful in basically sussing out, is it worth boonie crashing into these difficult places to get? And it's very helpful because in certain times of the year, like the fall here, we can very easily identify the maple. And I know it's like, okay, it's worth getting over that river to go take a closer look. And that's just a quick snapshot there. a bunch of our lines and how we're mapping them at Will McClatchy's place. It's actually 3 landowners adjacent to each other, all cooperating with our project. Next slide, please. But this is important. So this is a huge difference from the East Coast. Time to wrap it up? Okay. So I'll just end here, but you know, we've got situations where in many places there's lots of maple, but there may be 20-foot high walls of blackberry and Scotch broom. So we did an experiment here in this area where it's a riparian area, but it was so degraded, brought in a masticator just to like get a start, and it created, you know, a big mess. But now over the next couple of years, we've been going in and just doing handwork, building trails, you know, at a nice trail slope that you can walk up. And just with that handwork, we're making some progress. And you know, ultimately you'd want to get a team of 20, 30 people or something in there, and really, and there's always volunteers that are willing to do that. It's not hard to find those people to do that. But it's just a great opportunity to couple the restoration of a place, get watershed councils, soil and water conservation districts, and others involved in doing this restoration work, but with also the purpose of being able to tap some big leaf. Go ahead and hit the next slide. I won't talk, I'll shut up, but there's some information here on details on terrain issues and opportunities. The elk, I should talk about this. We have herds, huge herds of elk, and it's just not realistic to hang your tubing in the air when you've got these animals that just tear right through it. It might hurt them, probably not. They're so powerful, but they run as herds. And I mean, they would just literally wipe it out. So we started laying it on the ground. And that probably makes people in the sugar maple industry cringe, but we've had no problems now with elk. They just walk over the tubing. We've had one incident where like a bobcat or something bit into the tubing, but I think it was like probably saw bubbles and was like, oh, you know. And if you walk your lines every day, those things are easy to catch, easy to repair right there. But it is not easy to repair like a 3/4 inch main line that you spent a lot of time hanging on high tension wire. That's just a beast to work with. And so anyway, I'll stop there.